And next we have Abel Sakhau up from Exxaro. He's a climate strategist, helping them on their journey to a greener future. He's got 16 years of experience in the mining industry, 20 years worth of work experience. He's an environmental scientist with an MBA, so he's a businessman as well as a scientist, which is what you need here. He's headed up the National Association of Clean Air in South Africa and serves on a number of chairs and panels. So he's going to be telling us a little bit about Exxaro's journey. Thanks, Abel.
I didn't do it. Yeah, thanks, Graham, and this is still good morning. I'm gonna put. Yeah, I suppose everyone in the room knows more about ESG. A presentation is not to teach anyone anything, but to interest you in terms of engagements and when we have the conversation. And, oh, I need to do this. You've probably seen this slide so many times, and I was looking at it. They've added COVID. I think pre-COVID, it didn't have COVID. It had the other three legs. But I think this is the challenge. You know, how are we going to survive when we are confronted with these global challenges? And that's the question, you know. We still need resources to power our livelihoods, but we need to do that in a responsible manner. So one of the things that we've always been through at Exxaro is that, you know, we've always integrated our operational activities with the aspirational to power better lives in Africa and beyond. And I think it's important, you know, because then in your DNA, when we do projects, whatever we do, we always ask, what impact are we causing, you know? Is it a positive impact? Is it a negative impact? Because you are always aware that whatever you do creates impact, you know. And that has always been able to help us to navigate challenging areas in terms of our operations. So I think it was in 2018-19 when we did a revision in terms of our strategy to look at what are the new things that we need to focus on in terms of our new organizational strategy. You'll see at the top climate change, you know. And I've been with Exxaro, like Graham said, for a long time. When I joined Exxaro, I was called an air quality specialist. They then moved climate change. But it was difficult times in 2006 when I joined Exxaro. I would sit in meetings and people would ask me, what are you doing here? You know, they didn't understand, you know. And at that time, it was not even Exxaro, it was Kumba Resources. But the vision was always there to say we know that air quality and climate change are going to be a challenge. When companies didn't even know what climate change is. At that time, universities, we used to call it global warming. You know, it's now a fancy word, climate change. We'll sit in meetings with engineers and you start telling them about air quality, you start telling them about climate change. They say, we don't know what you're talking about. But in any case, because you are employed here, we need to accommodate you. You know, but fast track today, if you come to Exxaro and you talk about climate change, people would know what is it that you're talking about. Because our entire organizational strategy is built on how do we make our business portfolio resilient. So we are even no longer talking about climate change from a mitigation and adaptation perspective. We're now talking about business resilience, you know, because it's about that, you know. I keep on saying to even the ESCO and the board, say, we can have zero emissions, But if you are not resilient, climate change will take you out, you know. So it's not about emissions, but it's about how your portfolio is resilient to the changing environment we operate in, both physical risk and transitional risk. Then there's the energy transition, you know. Probably some of you have got generators, and some are thinking of solar, you know. But it's still a challenge in South Africa, this energy transition, because it still resides within the wealthy population of South Africa, you know. If you can't afford to put solar, you can't participate in the transition. You know, you'll be recipient to Eskom load shedding, you know. So one of the things that we do, we're currently investigating within the organization is to say, how then do we also support our employees to participate in the energy transition across the board? We're talking to financial institutions to say, can we have packages that we can offer within the organization if employees want to participate in the transition, they put solar, the organization can facilitate that. How do you start doing that? Because no one should be left behind. We can sit in these rooms and discuss, you know, but the people who are going to be affected are those ones who've just experienced the floods in KZN. You know, someone has to represent that. And organizational, you know, it's where people come. And that's where you've got a conglomerate of individuals that can be championing your strategy. So if you start taking your employees along with you, you can imagine the impact. You know, we've got like, what, I think 20,000 employees if you include contractors. So imagine 20,000. In South Africa, we know it's probably times 10, you know. You can influence how many people by just influencing one employee. And that's what we do. And that's why, for us, it embodies the just transition. Just transition is not a theoretical thing. Just transition is asking those questions, you know. How do you make sure that you start at home in terms of that transition? And that's our approach, you know. And one of the things also when the board and the ESCO reviewed our strategies to say, you know, how do we approach our transition and reimagining the organization, you know? Do we divest from coal? You know, we know that we are a responsible company. You know, probably some of the coal assets are better placed in our hands than someone else. Those ones that don't fit our strategic goal, we divest on. We're currently busy with Lupan, we divested from ECC. But I think what was important is that the board recognized that we have to engage in that transition in terms of growing the organization. Not just saying coal is bad, you know. Coal is still going to be with us for some time and is important for the energy security. And people need to hear that message. You know, we can't pretend that it does not exist. Coal is still going to be here. You know, you've got the 3 power stations in South Africa, Medupi, Kosile, and Matimba, still going to be with us for some time. And we are responsible enough to say we'll continue supporting South African energy transition while we maintain a supply of coal to those power stations, because we can do it responsibly. And you'll see in some of my slides, I'm going to skip some of that. And that's the model that we use. If you look at it, it's quite complicated, but I think it's effectively, if you look at that model, to say, how then are we approaching this? We're diversifying, we grow the organization, but we also understand that, you know, we have to transition at speed. We have to be a catalyst for economic growth where we operate. And we have to make sure that we empower employees to make impact, you know. We want to be carbon neutral by 2050, and we believe we're going to do it, you know. But from a portfolio perspective, you know, we want to get into new minerals. We've made this public, you know, copper, bauxite, manganese. We've got energy business, synergy. We also building a renewable plant in Lephalale, 70 megawatts, and we're growing that energy business. So this is a moving train for us, and it's not easy. It's complicated, but I think it's important that we engage in such transition. And for me, these slides, when we presented it at the ESCO, to say, let's stop talking about emissions. It's about resilience. It's about, if KZN happens, are we certain that our supply chain will continue to operate? Because we take stuff to Richards Bay on trains. We've got spares that we get from KZN. Are we certain that if we have that type of flooding every single year, our supply chain will still manage to survive? Or do we have to now look at the risk associated with that to say we can't have the bulk of our supply chain located in the KZN, we have to move to Maputo in terms of the ports. So it's those kinds of discussions that we're currently having within the organization. How do we design our tailings facilities, for example? Because your traditional design approach are not working under a changing climate. We talk about water security. We can't operate without water. And if you go to Lephalale, one of the biggest challenges in Lephalale is that they don't have water. How then do we make sure that we've got water security? But that water security is also supporting communities, because we can afford to build a pipeline to have security within our operations. But what about communities and the farmers? It's those kind of things that we're talking about. To say you want to have an organization that's resilient, that when communities are not happy with you, you'll be able to partner with them and make them also resilient to the changing climatic conditions. So this is our approach in terms of decarbonization. We first have to optimize our operations, make them carbon efficient. So for every ton of coal that we produce, we must have the least carbon intensity possible. And the value chain partners, we're talking to them to say, how do we support you in this transition also? Because you don't want to transition only to find out the guy who's supposed to give you fuel can't give you fuel because they've been affected by the energy transition. So how do we make sure that we work with Total, we work with Engine, all those suppliers of fuel to transition with us? But important for us is the stakeholder engagement, our employees. How do we make sure that our employees, the stakeholders, communities are also transitioning with us? Some of the things that we do with communities, instead of supporting agricultural project from a traditional perspective, we're now talking about regenerative agriculture, where any agricultural project, we're going to transition it also to become a regenerative process. How much does it cost? We know small-scale farmers cannot afford that. It's a responsibility from our side to say, how then do we support them to go into regenerative agriculture? Because we know it's going to be it's going to open markets for them. You've got your Woolworths, your Spars, saying we want to work with with the producers that come from that space of regenerative agriculture, because we want to keep carbon in the ground. So this is our aspiration. We've got certainty that we can reduce our emissions, the current emissions that we have, with a couple of corporate activities that we're currently doing by, I think it's about 43% by 2025. And from there, you'll see it's a gray area. We're investigating, the hydrogen. We're excited that Anglo managed to do the hydrogen track, because we'll then move at speed with them. Carbon sequestrations, But I think when we presented this, it was clear that our challenge is actually the Scope 3 emissions. How do we start dealing with the Scope 3 emissions? And we don't have an answer now, because it's a challenge for everyone, especially for coal mining organization, to say, how do you start dealing with your Scope 3 emissions? You can't do it alone. And for us, we're the biggest supplier of coal to Eskom. So you can imagine we have to go to Eskom and say, let's partner together to reduce our Scope 1, which then benefits our Scope 3. But those are the conversations that we want to have with Eskom. So it's important, and the aspect of offsets, we own land, with mining, one thing that we also own is land. We've got a forest in Soban that we want to protect so that it cannot be harvested, because we want to get into that offset space too. And when you look at how we approach social impact, we did an investigation supported by Sustainability Truthing for the past, I think it's 2 years. We picked up that there's a concept, this, impact investing, to say you can actually have catalyze economies if you partner with other people, other stakeholders, through your impact investing approach. And that's where we are from a social impact aspect, to say we're focusing on, every time we go to communities, on water security, biodiversity conservation, and regenerative agriculture, and renewable energy. Because we can't do everything. We have to strategically find aspects that will create the maximum impact possible based on the resources that we have. And on the other side of social, how then do you start making sure that your communities participate in the digital economy? You transition the skills, We know we're going to, at some point, lose our coal mines. How then do we start supporting our employees today and communities that are looking up to say, in the next coming 20 to 30 years, I want my child to go and work at Exxaro. But if Exxaro is not going to have a coal mine, we have to support those communities to know that we have to transition to other economies, to others. The green economy is very important. Everyone, we talk about green economy, but it's a challenging one, to say, how then to start implementing that? Everyone says green economy, but practically, how do you make sure that it's something that is sustainable? If you work for a mine, mines do pay good salaries, and people have got that expectation. Does the green economy equate to those good salaries that we'll get in mining? Or do we have to start having a different narrative, in terms of the changing landscape, economic landscape? And when you look at, I'm going to skip some of the slides, why partnerships are important. Some of you might have heard of the Impact Catalyst. We partnered with a like-minded organization, Anglo-American in Limpopo, to say the challenges from a social impact are enormous. We cannot do them alone. If you've got 1 rand from Exxaro, or you've got 1 rand from 5 companies, which one is better? And that's our approach, to say, how do we partner with other organizations to create more impact, so that the money that we have, if you put it in one pot, it can go a long way. That's our approach, to say we cannot want to do everything together because we want to be recognized as the leading ESG company. Let's partner with other companies so that we can create the maximum impact possible. And some of the biodiversity work that we're doing, from a presidential level, working with the president also in Mozambique, we're reintroducing rhinos in Mozambique. Our biggest coal mine, Grootegeluk, is adjacent to our game farm or biodiversity protected area, Mangeti. And in Mangeti, we've got rhinos. Because of the challenge of protecting rhinos in South Africa, we saw fit that how can we support global biodiversity? Because it doesn't matter where the rhinos are, as long as they're protected, isn't it? If we keep them in South Africa, the challenge is that in 10 years' time, we might not have them because of poaching. So if we take rhinos, we put them in Mozambique, we're still protecting them and we're still enhancing biodiversity. And that's what it's all about. It's not about keeping it to yourself, but it's about finding innovative solutions to say, we've got a rhino challenge, how do we then make sure that the generations that are going to come, they can still go into game parks and they will see rhinos? We found that if you take them to Mozambique, the chances of them surviving is better than in South Africa. And that's what we're doing. And it's a presidential project that we are facilitating in partnership with peace parks. And on the other side, and there's so many of these things, on the other side, then we have your wetland that was affected by agricultural activities. When we opened the mine at Belfast, we didn't say, we didn't do this impact. Argued with government to say it's not our responsibility. It was already a damaged wetland. We went, found solutions, and we are now restoring that wetland. And it will probably be up for a couple of hours, because it's now starting to function. We've invested so much, and it's challenging to restore a wetland. I didn't know, But I think the message for me is that, when we have the conversation, it's not about accolades. You can get accolades, but I think it's about how do we create impact from a partnership perspective, and how do we make sure that no one is left behind? And I literally mean no one. Gogo Dlamini in the shack. How do we make sure that? We can sit in the conferences and have this discussion, but how do we make sure that person is not left behind? And how do we stretch that rent? How do we make sure that that rent is stretched enough so that it can be able to create maximum impact? And I suppose if we don't act, even that million rand that you'll have in the bank is not going to save you. We have to act now. And that's the message we always want to communicate, to say, partnership, let's act now, and let's protect people's livelihood. Thanks, Karen.